I've seen one vid by this person, it was okay, now I'm looking at another vid. The channel, I'm autistic, now what? A huge podcast is promoting terrible autism pseudoscience, and I'm annoyed. So let's see. The person in question and the podcast, that's not exactly the impression I was getting, so let's see if maybe both sides are on not so stable terrain. Let's see. So she's making a rather authoritative claim, and let's see.
So this clip circulated on my Discord server recently. A lot of people were really unhappy about it.
If a woman has obesity and diabetes, she has quadruple the risk of having an autistic child.
It's from the podcast Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett. The podcast with the thumbnails, even if you haven't watched it, you probably recognize the thumbnails that I feel like every podcast is trying to emulate nowadays. But he interviewed Dr. Chris Palmer, who is a psychiatrist. He works at Harvard, and he's recently been doing the rounds on a lot of different channels and podcasts to promote his book, Brain Energy, the book that will forever change how we understand and treat mental health, apparently. So Chris Palmer is very keen.
Well, there is this idea that dementia is actually type 3 diabetes, so, you know, there's quite a lot of action and activity in that space, so I wonder how he approaches that. Where there's smoke, there's fire is a good rule of thumb. It's not always true, but let's see.
On the ketogenic diet. The ketogenic diet is a highly restricted diet where people consume a lot of fats. Most of your calories are coming from fats. You get adequate protein,
and
it's
you can
very,
stick
very
to
low carbohydrate.
easily.
So mostly
But if you get seizures, doing a keto diet helps you with that, rather reliably. But because it's so hard to stick to the keto diet, well, it's good that we have other ways to treat it. But so clearly diet affects in the short term how your brain operates, obviously. And anyway,
you're eating
I wonder why she
meat
brings that
and
up.
cheese and cream and avocados. And then when you eat this way, you go into a state called ketosis. So your brain and body is running on fat.
Maybe do it for a week or two, or maybe you can reset your metabolism if you got some weird stuff going on. Or just straight up do fasting. I don't know. I've done fasting for 3 days twice before. Just water with some electrolytes.
Unbeknownst to most people, the ketogenic diet was developed over 100 years ago now by a physician for one and only one purpose. It was developed to stop seizures.
Yeah,
and it's true, the ketogenic diet is a somewhat evidence-based treatment for epilepsy. Epilepsy.org.uk says, so far, there has been more research into the use of ketogenic diets for children than for adults. Some studies have shown that about half of children will have a good response to the ketogenic diet, and some will become seizure-free. However, the ketogenic diet does not work for everyone, and it is not possible to predict who it will help. More high-quality research is needed to find out how well these diets work in treating epilepsy. So because there is some success in treating epilepsy with the ketogenic diet, Chris Palmer then...
By the way, I'm all for more research, but I'd like to have the science here, not just like a random text on the screen.
Takes this one step further. He goes, well, it works for epilepsy, and sometimes epilepsy medications are used to treat mental illnesses, are used in psychiatry. So maybe the ketogenic diet would work to cure mental illnesses.
And that's quite nice when people do look into these things and so on, right?
And for him, this potentially extends to neurodevelopmental conditions, such as autism and ADHD as well. The podcast they did together was almost
not just for him. Let's put it that way. I haven't heard that doing a keto diet is the be-all, end-all thing that this guy is advocating for, right? I think he's pointing to a broader connection there. High-quality diet may be very good for for brain development, and that may have downstream benefits for other things. Be it that people with neurodivergent presentation are actually more capable of working with their features and disadvantages, right? Their benefits and disadvantages.
Hours, I'm going to be responding to this 9-minute clip that was uploaded on their Diary of a CEO's clips channel. The title of that video was Dr. Chris Palmer's brutally honest opinion on ADHD and autism. Let's go, let's have a look, let's see what the brutally honest opinions.
I mean, ADHD, I'm thinking there's a lot going on there, not just what to eat.
Oh, are we ready? I don't think I'm...
But also a lot of other lifestyle things.
I'm ready.
What's with giving children all this medication for being normal children? I don't understand. Like, how about letting children have a healthy diet and sunlight and, I don't know, maybe stress is a thing? Like, so this is the thing. Somebody can be on an ADHD spectrum that's subclinical, and if the rat race isn't so intense, you're actually just a healthy human being. Anyway, let's see what's going on here.
I've had so many parents message me about autism and ADHD. So many. You know, I've had so many concerned parents message me specifically on Instagram saying, please, Steve.
I'm also thinking, what about those microplastics and whatnot that resemble and act like hormones? Like, what's up with that?
Had a child diagnosed with autism. They're trying to understand it. They're trying to get good information on it.
Okay, first of all, why are people coming to Stephen Bartlett for advice on autism? Am I missing something here? It's a bit worrying. I mean, I know post-diagnosis support is not that good. Often,
I mean, let's put it that way. If you got a chronic condition, the quality of advice you get tends to be rather lacking because you get a short-term fix that you're just supposed to keep reapplying. At least that's what Dr. K, Healthy Gamer GG, says, that this is the tendency.
It's diagnosis for both children and adults, diagnosis, and then poop, on your way, good luck, God bless you on your journey. But still, why is Steve the place to turn? I'm not quite sure. Is it because he wrote a book called Happy Sexy Millionaire? Is it because he accompanied Prince William on a royal trip to Bournemouth? Is it because he attended one lecture at Manchester?
What is this? It's because he's got a platform and he's interviewing experts.
I can't really say anything about that. I am yet to finish a degree. We're the same, me and Steve. But yeah, I wouldn't say an entrepreneur's Instagram DMs would be
Are you interviewing experts on the regular?
the first place I would personally turn to if I was concerned about my child. Perhaps he means that people have been requesting that he brings on some guests on the podcast who are experts in autism, which I suppose is what he's trying to do here. Let's see if Dr. Chris Palmer has any good information. Okay, before...
Like, he does bring on experts, and this guy may be good for that topic. Let's find out.
Before we see what he has to say, the unpacking of today's conversation was brought to you by CyberGhost VPN. The VPN, 38 million users, and an excellent rating on Trustpilot.
I mean, I would run an ad for a VPN personally if I could be transparent about, like, yeah, you can get past those regional content restrictions. Yeah, you can do that. Anything else? I don't know, man.
You've used the word autism and ADHD as we've been speaking about metabolism. What is the link in your view?
Everything. The link is everything.
I think if any doctor says anything about a theory with that much certainty, you should run. Run fast, no matter how promising.
Nah, it's called bias. And bias, everyone has bias.
It seems the link is everything. Everything is a very, very strong word. I had to look at this like signs
it's
your doctor is a
having
quack
a
thing on
bias.
Huffington.
I actually think it's good when people lay their biases on the table squarely like that. And so maybe it's just 50%, but that's still pretty close to everything if you think about it anyway.
Post. And yeah, one of the red flags if your doctor speaks in absolutes.
The link is everything. So
like doctors have a particular code of engaging with a patient that involves pretending that they have the absolute wisdom without saying it. Yes, so there's a particular method to it. Placebo effect enabling communication, right?
Really?
the mitochondrial theory of autism actually was first proposed in 1985. And since then, we have had an explosion of research linking
Anyway, let's get to the point. Like, right, so far we're 5 minutes in, nothing really has been said that's relevant.
mitochondria and mitochondrial dysfunction to autism specifically.
So Chris Palmer thinks potentially all mental illnesses and some physical health conditions too are caused by mitochondrial dysfunction. So mitochondria.
And that seems like a
itself,
promising
gives cells energy.
theory
He basically thinks this might be the root of
for a
all
lot
what he
of
considers disease, and the main solution in the office for
symptoms,
this
if
is
you listen to the
ketogenic diet.
experts.
So it does seem like there might be some sort of association. The idea was
Yeah.
first suggested in 1985. It was after a pair of researchers looked at 4 autistic individuals who had a sign of mitochondrial disease. They put forward the possibility that some autistic people
Interesting nascent field, right? So
might have inborn errors of carbohydrate metabolism, but he is right that some studies have.
as for inborn errors, yeah, right, like this is stuff from 50 years ago. This is a totally new field in a way. Mitochondrial function. We keep learning new things about the mitochondria nowadays. How it initiates hormone production and so on, turning on and off certain parts of the human genome, stuff like that.
Linked mitochondrial dysfunction to autism specifically. I looked at a 2012 meta-analysis and systematic review, which concluded that a relatively high number of autistic children, around
So looking at a meta-analysis, this may not be at the modern level of science what we have here.
5% had mitochondrial dysfunction, but they couldn't say if that was the cause of autism or whether that was just a secondary factor. At this point, it's not clear if mitochondrial dysfunction contributes to the development or pathogenesis.
Yeah, it's not clear, right? Like if you just look at that one, it doesn't really matter to the purpose of this video. Like, let's get to the science.
Of ASD, or if it's merely an epiphenomenon of ASD. And a 2020 review concluded ASD appears to be associated with novel types of mitochondrial abnormalities, which are just beginning to be understood, and the genetic mechanisms which drive these abnormalities are still very unclear.
Yeah, see, 2020, and this guy's getting a lot of tailwind here from this paper. Interesting. Yeah, we got to study more.
The link is everything.
So no, I don't think we are in any place by any stretch of the imagination to say with any certainty that mitochondrial dysfunction is everything
Well, I think that's a fair way to talk about this personally.
when it comes to autism. As they always say, correlation is not causation.
That's
I read
also a thing, but so you got to put a better theory on the table. If you say, okay, there's a correlation, but also this guy's talking about there's plenty mechanistic work in the field. So yeah, we got to look at the mechanistic work. So let's look at what she's looking at here for the mechanistic explanations.
2021 article discussing recent research in this area. Despite such findings, even some mitochondria researchers are hesitant to causally link mitochondria and autism. The mitochondria
That sentence makes my head hurt because even some mitochondria researchers, what are some mitochondria researchers? Are they representative of the field? Are they, like, what does that mean? Of course, some people out of some group, out of any group, will say something. This is irrelevant. But the next sentence may be more interesting.
an adult or child has are not necessarily the same as those she had in the womb when autism is thought to develop. So just because a lot of autistic people have one
Who says this? What's the mechanistic studies she's pointing to? What's the maybe quantitative studies she's pointing to? Well, I'm not convinced that this is a good way to try to take down the Dr. Palmer person.
When autism is thought to develop. So just because a lot of autistic people have one particular thing does not mean that it is the reason that they are autistic, obviously.
As I've mentioned to you, the rates of autism have gone through the roof. In the United States, they've quadrupled in the last 20 years.
So the CDC says currently 1 in 36 children are autistic. A UK study that I looked at recently for another video suggested 1 in 34 people might be autistic, and that may be half of all
And by the way, I have a couple of theories why this could be happening. Sure.
autistic people in the UK are currently undiagnosed. But in the year 2000, autism prevalence was thought to be 1 in 150. But you've got to remember, in 1966, we thought the prevalence was 4.5 in 10,000. So, you know, the data changes to reflect the new information that we gain about the autisms. But yeah, you can twist those numbers and make them seem really scary if you want to. Look, it's on the rise. We have an autism epidemic. This is something that autism speaks.
I wouldn't really characterize this like that at all. Is this just a thing that could help people with autism that this guy is talking about? Why is he trying to pretend he's fear-mongering? I don't understand. Isn't he doing the fear-mongering of this guy now? What?
Geeks kind of do on their website, which I don't really like. They have this very negative autism statistics and facts page. And on there they say 1 in 36 children have autism, up from the previous 1 in 44. So there's like this implication that it is on the rise, it is a problem that is getting worse, which is definitely the message they tried to push in their very controversial 2009 advert, I am autism.
I am autism. Your neighbors are happy to pretend that I don't exist.
Like, why are we talking about this?
It's their child.
I feel like I'm mentioning this in every single video, but it's a gem. It's this
How
quality,
are you talking
quality
about
cinema.
this?
The whole page is quite negative. It includes a breakdown of costs of autism services. I would just appreciate, you know, even if all these things are true, these pixelated facts you have up there, I'd appreciate a little sentence of like, but it doesn't have to be this way. Work with us and we'll try and improve the lives of autistic people.
Like, isn't that what this guy's trying to do? Work with people with autism to make things better? Isn't that what this is about? I don't understand.
You know, it doesn't have to necessarily end on a bleak note, but I suppose writing in this way and autism is on the rise, it's coming for your children, maybe that helps to bring the donations
Sure.
in. And perhaps it works quite well for Chris
That
Palmer's
may also be
career
a
too.
thing.
So
I'm
why
not sure
is
about Chris Palmer being the guy here to point to. Like, isn't she doing kind of a lot of finger pointing here? And it's like, oh, this guy's scary. Like, what is the critique here? It's like, oh, you should run from him. You should run from him, right? That's what she said.
autism on the up?
At
Well, there
least
could be
implied.
some environmental factors involved, but what we know for sure is that there is more awareness, more understanding of autism, and we're getting better at diagnosing it. In the
Yeah,
past, autistic people
sure.
who weren't classified as having a learning disability is what we
That is one of the things that's most likely true. Just like there's probably also a serious environmental component.
call it in the UK. If you're in the US, you call it intellectual disability, would often slip through the cracks and go through life unsupported. Those children who make up 2/3 of autistic people are finally getting a diagnosis. This is crazy to me, but I suppose it makes sense. A 2021 study found that children in affluent areas were 80% more likely to get an autism diagnosis, and black
There could be
children
many
were
reasons for
30%
that.
less likely to get a diagnosis. Prevalence
Oh,
estimates are likely to
yeah.
continue to rise as disparities are reduced. We're also noticing that the gender ratios are
Could be, but so there's always an issue with medicalizing a condition that may just be part of normal human life, right? Oh, we got the doctor who's gonna fix your problems. Like, no, like, that's not how a lot of things work, and especially not for chronic conditions. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing that people get diagnosed, but it doesn't mean they get help, right? So
shifting and more girls are being diagnosed. This is a good thing. I was diagnosed in my mid-20s. I absolutely wish I had been diagnosed way earlier. I tried to think about it too much, but I needed that
Yeah,
diagnosis.
there's many
Please
people
let's not turn
where
something
that's true.
positive. More children getting the recognition and the help that they need, the help that I wish I had had. Let's not turn that into something big and
recognition is
scary.
good,
In the United States, they've
but we also should mind the concerns, right? Like, a diagnosis isn't gonna make your life better necessarily.
quadrupled in the last 20 years. And people think, well, what does that have to do with diet? Those kids haven't eaten a diet yet. Well, their parents have.
I'm not sure if he's trying to imply that our parents weren't keto, and that's why we are
I don't think that's where he's trying to go with that.
autistic now. Not like historically a load of people have been keto. But yes, he is not the first, and he most certainly will not be
Like,
the
I don't
last
know why she
person
keeps
to claim
pushing for
that
this keto
autism is
thing.
caused by or could be cured by diet. Just in the last few months, I've seen content, some of it's not recent content, but I've seen content talking about how dairy causes autism, how gluten causes autism,
Yeah,
how
it
autism
could-
can be
could
cured
be
by going
involved.
carnivore, by going raw
For some
vegan, by
people.
going high carb vegan. As the National Health Service in the UK states,
I ask
autism
good
is
people
not caused
experiment with
by
these
vaccines,
things.
by bad parenting, or by diet. If he's implying
Hey, who says this?
vegan by going high carb vegan, as the National Health Service in the UK states, autism is
National Health Service in the UK. All right. Well, that's one of these institutions that tend to be at least 10 years behind the science. So
not caused by vaccines, by bad parenting, or by diet. If he's implying that keto is the answer, we certainly do not have enough research to back that up.
And let me share a couple of statistics.
we're living in a world in which the scientific method continues to revolutionize our understanding. So let's see.
So people are scratching their heads. Where's all this autism coming from? I thought autism was genetic.
As a psychiatrist, I imagine he probably knows that we're not exactly scratching our heads. Yes, autism is genetic. Since the first autism twin study in 1977, several teams have compared autism rates in twins and shown that autism is highly heritable. Genetics might not
The problem with twin studies is that you don't have the divergent environments for the twins. Like, they both live in similarly competitive societies most of the time, so these are not good for saying, oh, it's genetic. These are, in fact, minimizing everything else. They minimize the environmental factor, so not a fan of twin studies, unless you have a very specific setup where they live in totally different environments. And also in terms of food supply, right? Like, if you have a twin study and they broadly eat the same junk food the US puts on the table, like, that wouldn't be so good.
Not explain everything, and there are environmental factors which are linked to autism in
Yeah,
some way.
sure.
But it's thought that maybe these just work with the genetic factors.
And if autism is genetic,
And of course they work with the genetic factors. Every person who I've ever heard on this or another similar podcast says that people are very individual in terms of what they tolerate well and what they don't. And the people where they don't tolerate something very well, it can have all kinds of downstream implications.
it shouldn't quadruple in 20 years. Quadrupling in 20 years means something in the environment is causing it.
Does it? Why? We know the rates of diagnosis are increasing. That doesn't necessarily mean the rate of autism is
Also
increasing.
fair
The first
enough.
person to be diagnosed autistic died last year. We haven't even had the language to describe.
If you're going to make this argument, you want to attack on the data, right? Like, so what are the data points? Like, are they durable, etc., etc.? I would expect that he's going to do the work of looking at the data. Okay, so present me the data. I'll hear you out.
Autism for that long.
To provide just one piece of evidence to support what I'm saying, if a woman has obesity, she
By the way, also, yeah, keep in mind, this is hundreds, if not thousands of hours of research into this topic that he presents within 1 hour, right? So you got to do your own due diligence if you disagree with him. He gives off the sense, at least to me here, that he hasn't really looked into this in terms of like more than 10 hours, right? And 10 hours is not a lot, right? So again, I'm not saying this guy's a great communicator here or whatever. I think he's making some mistakes in terms of how he words it. Like when he says it's everything, I'm like, yeah, that's a bias. And it's nice he puts it on the table, but I wouldn't actually advise it. But so it just shows a level of conviction in the work he has done. And I mean, fair enough. Probably an overstatement, but people do overstate things. And given the format, I think it's appropriate to make this overstatement, even if not ideal.
has double the risk of having an autistic child. If a woman has diabetes, she has double the risk of having an autistic child. If a woman has both obesity and diabetes, she has quadruple the risk of having an autistic child. If a man is obese, he has double the risk of having an autistic child.
Again, very fear-mongering vibes here that make me uncomfortable. Very autism is a disease and it's coming for you and your child. I'm sure many of you, as I feel inclined to, again, it would only be anecdotal, but I'm sure you feel
I just want the data. Like, she's fear-mongering. Like, oh, this guy's saying things like, oh, it's fear. Like, where's the fear? I don't understand. I want the data. Stop with the fear-mongering or whatever. It's like, people don't care when you're a hypocrite, but this works me all the wrong ways.
so compelled to say, well, my parents didn't have obesity or diabetes, and I'm still autistic, but there does seem to
Yeah, but if it's quadruple, then you still have a regular chance.
be a link in obesity and being overweight and autism, and there is also a link with a father having a higher BMI and having an autistic child. But researchers think these factors are unlikely to cause autism alone, because a father's weight does not directly affect
Which researchers? Let's go back. Who says this?
obesity or diabetes, and I'm still autistic, but there does seem to be a link in obesity and being overweight and autism,
It
and
does
there is
seem
also
to
a
be.
link
Who says that?
with a father having
It does seem to be. And who says that?
a higher BMI and having an autistic child. But researchers think these
Who are
factors
these
are unlikely
researchers?
to cause autism
And who
alone.
says
because
unlikely what? Anyway, let's see the explanation.
a father's weight does not directly affect fetal development, the findings hint that any contribution from his BMI is genetic. The risk from the mother could be partly genetic as well.
Because a father's weight does not directly affect fetal development, the findings hint that any contribution from his BMI is genetic. Do they, though? They actually don't. They might hint at it, but it could also be totally wrong. It could also be totally down to the stuff that is typically being eaten in that region. Like, who says this?
Well, this provides substantial evidence that at least some of the association between maternal BMI and children's risk in quotation marks, of autism
And yeah, we could research that. We could look into that.
stems from genetic factors that are associated with both BMI and risk for autism. So maybe there's just a link between autism and having a higher BMI for some reason. With diabetes, there does seem to be a link again, but it's correlation, not causation again.
Alright.
We do not fully understand it.
We don't fully understand it. By the way, it's also a kind of cope. And if this guy who spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours on this topic, looking at the literature, clinical evidence, etc., if he says it, and sure, he overstates the case maybe, but if he says it, maybe that's a bit more valuable than what she's trying to do here with her concern trolling, and that's what it is. And I know it comes from a good place, at least I'm very sympathetic to that view of it. But so it is concern trolling.
That's why when you look up causes of autism, you tend to see, well, it's genetic and maybe environmental stuff,
just
but
do a
we don't
quick
really know
Google
what
search.
drug.
Yeah.
Because we're not sure.
Yeah,
So
because
people are
that's how it
scratching
works.
their
No, it
heads trying to
doesn't.
figure out, where is all this autism coming from? Well, look around in the population. Are the rates of obesity going up? Are the rates of diabetes going up? The answer is unequivocally yes. And that is a reflection. It's not about fat shaming. I don't want anybody to hear that and wag their finger at fat people and say, oh, you're causing autism because you're overeating. It's not that simple. That's not the way it goes.
It's not that simple. Well, you certainly
Yeah.
made it seem as if it was. I'm also uncomfortable with the fact that he brings up not wanting to fat shame, but then completely demonizes autism. He's happy to
Does
portray
he?
autism as this horrible disease that was caused by negative things in our environment or our bad
I
habits.
mean, autism has all kinds of negative aspects. Let's be real here. It is a medical condition, right? I'm not saying there aren't upsides, and he's just doing his job as a doctor, where people come to him with a condition that is life-altering in a negative way, reliably.
And I wonder if you stop to think about how that might make autistic people and their families feel.
People with obesity have
I think the people with the autistic families feel like they have a big problem with a person who's autistic, because that's how that tends to go.
a metabolic or
And
mitochondrial
he's speaking to that. And I think rightfully. And hey, maybe you can change society so it won't be there anymore. And I'm all for that. But so that is such an obscure way to concern troll right there. I mean to understand where she's coming from, but it's complicated.
problem. That is why they have obesity. Now, that might be caused by the foods they're eating, but they don't know any better usually. They think it's just about calories. And what I'm here to say is, no, there's more to food than just calories. It might be those chemicals in the food that you're eating or something else, or it might be chemicals in our environment. It might be pesticides or microplastics, the forever chemicals that are becoming more and more ubiquitous. All of these things disrupt metabolism and mitochondrial function. And so when I talk...
There's many more things to air as ideas for how mitochondrial dysfunction can happen, and other things can happen, maybe related here.
Talk about obesity and diabetes, increasing risk for autism. It's not about fat shaming. It's about understanding. It's about understanding that the parents have a metabolic problem already. That means that they have a problem in their cells with their mitochondria, and they then pass those on to their children. And in some cases, it may not show itself immediately as obesity or diabetes. It might show itself as a brain condition.
So we've hit a lot of buzzwords, phrases here.
And I would have wanted to hit the point where it's like, yeah, maybe the mitochondria are gonna be actually fine. Actually, even if they aren't fine in the parents, they'll be fine in the baby if you give it a totally different environment. So, sure enough, you could point to that, but then the baby is gonna have the same kind of food that the community has, right? So.
Here, we've got pesticides, we've got chemicals in food, we've got microplastics. I can't really wrap my head around what's being said here. People have obesity not because they're eating too many calories, but actually he says it's because of mitochondrial dysfunction, but that mitochondrial dysfunction...
And that tends to be an increasingly plausible hypothesis from what I could gather.
Might be caused by the food they eat. I think that's what he's trying to say. I really don't think we have enough evidence to say that obesity is caused by a problem with our mitochondria.
Yeah, but that's her. That's your. I would like to see a little bit of science on that, because we increasingly see evidence to point that way. So let's see what science she's going to bring up here.
Obesity is caused by a problem with our mitochondria. Isn't there a chance that obesity could cause mitochondrial dysfunction? I think he's just sticking with this one.
Yeah, so he has many hundreds, if not thousands of hours of looking into this. And from my own personal listening to a broad range of experts, there seems to be an increasingly plausible perspective. So this guy, maybe he spent multiple hundreds of hours, if not thousands, on looking into this, and he came to a conclusion. If she can't get over herself to recognize that, yeah, maybe he knows something there, and she's not going to put in the work to do the research on the same kind of scope, or maybe ask experts directly, and ask people who actually did research and don't just read off of some standard of care guidebook. No, I want somebody who actually looked into this for many hundreds of hours, and she can talk to them and ask them, and then maybe, I would entertain what she says a little more as well. If she did that, get somebody who has a critical view of this guy on the show, who did research that is contrary or in the same field, but more going to question what he says. I would love to hear that, but this is just really not a good look.
Size fits all approach. Everything that's perceived wrong with human bodies and brains must be caused by this one thing, whether it's obesity or...
And yeah, there can be a kind of tunnel vision people get when they see a piece of how the world works. yeah, maybe it's like only 50-50. Maybe there's 50% what this guy's talking about, and then there's 50% something else. Maybe, yeah, sure. Again, I say he has a bias, and that's okay.
Autism, schizophrenia. It's just an appealing way to package a message, I suppose, to the general public. It's black and white. It sounds scientific enough, and I'm sure it sells books.
Because
Oh, I'm sure it sells books. Yeah, because people write books. Because it's so plausible to get published in a big journal when there's all kinds of things going wrong with the big journals nowadays. As far as I understand, selling books is the new publishing in a high-stakes journal. And yeah, there's less safeguards, although peer review was never a good safeguard. It's not a good method to figure out if something is correct. It's just there to eliminate basic errors in terms of the methodology, which even that peer review tends to not be perfect with. So anyway, writing a book, it's a start. People criticizing the book on the merits presented in the book, that's how you deal with that. Not what this person is trying to pull off here without really knowing that she's trying to pull off something here. Anyway.
lots of other things can play a role. And if an obese woman, for instance, also has an infection during pregnancy, that's going to increase her risk for having an autistic child even more. So she couldn't help whether she got an infection or not. Tragically, we just had an epidemic called COVID. And the early signs are telling us that, in fact, neurodevelopmental disorders are going to increase as a result of that.
Again, there does seem to be a link between maternal infection and autism. However, you can't just say things like this, that COVID is going to cause more autism.
Is that what he said? I feel like he said there's signs. There's additional knowledge this guy brings to the table that she may not take into account.
Where is your evidence for that? A fetal imaging study in Germany, for example, found age-appropriate brain development in babies of women who had mild or moderate COVID-19 during pregnancy, and no differences from babies whose mothers had not been infected. And infants born in New York City from March to December 2020 to women who had mild or moderate COVID-19 showed no signs of delay in motor or social development.
These are different data points we're talking about here. Also mild or moderate. What about long COVID? What about that one?
We already had a quadrupling of the rates of autism. We are likely to see even worse statistics going forward.
I do feel concerned about autism being presented this way on this podcast as well. As a result of something that went wrong, something like a fever that maybe could have been prevented if the parents had been more careful. I do worry that pushing this information in this very grave and serious tone could make some parents of autistic children see them as damaged in some way.
But they have a harder time doing things that comes natural to other people.
There was a healthy child there somewhere, but then this thing happened to them. And
that is actually what happens in the idea that Palmer is suggesting. That actually, yeah, people could have less autism on the whole if we did certain things.
Made them how they are now. And maybe they might blame themselves and feel like it's their fault.
But why would they blame themselves if there's if it's the environment?
There's one mother who posts a lot of content on social media. I don't personally feel very comfortable with making a whole account about your autistic child. The stuff that's posted on there is mostly positive, which I think is better.
Like, you don't have to make it genetical to get out of the responsibility for your autistic child. You're still out of it. You're still out of it, right? Like, just because you ate crappy food doesn't mean you're responsible. It means you didn't know better, and there was no way that you could realistically know at all. So
Then sure.
it would be nice if she was a bit more open to the suggestions being made, and awareness that this guy probably spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours looking into this. And the science is evolving, and so pointing to institutions that tend to be 10 years behind at least is like, it's not good. It's just not good.
Negative stuff and sharing meltdowns and stuff like that, but still not my favorite thing on earth. And she does have one post where I think she has a picture or a video of her child as a baby, and she's reflecting on how she's had these feelings of like, was it my fault? Did something happen to my child that made her this way? And I think she discussed in that post something about oxygen during labor and things like that. I just felt like, oh my gosh, I really hope you delete this and there is no trace of this on the internet by the time your child gets older, you know, because I just think it could make a person feel really broken. Anyway, at least he didn't say the COVID vaccine caused autism.
The hope.
The hope.
Spike protein, it does interfere with regulation of inflammation, right?
With that big smile, his eyes lit up. Is the hope between the pages of your book by any chance?
Is it if we understand that science,
The scientists don't fully understand the science yet.
we can do something about it now, today.
It's just
So
seems so
once
petty
again,
on her
he's
part.
speaking in
I
absolutes.
don't know.
He's given us this big, scary problem, but don't worry, he has the one true solution.
If you understand, if you see signs of autism in your child.
If you've seen signs of autism in your child, get them assessed, get them a diagnosis if you can, so they can have accommodations in schools.
If you see signs of metabolic or mental health conditions in your children, if we intervene early enough, we can probably do something about it.
How?
Number one, by recognizing the problem. And then two, for some people, it could be as simple as dietary interventions.
I don't think I've ever had one health condition that doesn't have some sort of like really restricted diet connected to it as like one of the potential holistic treatment
Projecting something onto this.
with like terrible evidence on it. I don't know what it is with diet. I guess it's just easy for the average person to control, and when you're following the diet, it can give you a sense of control. I suppose compared to some medication.
Like if you only find diets that don't work for you, and then you're like, oh, it's easy for people. It's like, what? It's contradictory on its face. Like it really doesn't show any sort of experience or understanding of the topic of what you eat.
It might feel like the risks are pretty low, although some of these restrictive diets can be pretty dangerous. The ketogenic diet can actually lead to kidney stones. It can lead to increases in your LDL or your bad cholesterol. It can double your risk for heart.
The LDL thing, you do have to keep in mind, it's only one subtype of LDL that's a problem. So I'm not sure if this is accounting for that.
Heart disease, and it can increase the risk of neural tube birth problems such as spina bifida.
Or just
And sure, there are problems you could run into when you do a variety of keto diets. Like, there's some keto diets that aren't really keto diets in some of these studies, so you gotta be careful there too.
hyper focusing on
And again, I'm not a proponent of the keto diet. It's hard to stay on it unless you really see a benefit, and then, well, you probably see the trade-off be worth it. But it's really restrictive, so it's not a diet you can easily recommend. And Palmer probably knows that. So I don't really think it's fair to keep trying to... You know what would be fair if she read the book? Anyway.
good, clean living. So that means prioritizing sleep, little less screen time, little more human contact, purpose in life,
You have no purpose in life. That is why you're autistic. I'm not sure what he's trying to say.
That's good for good health. You feel a sense of purpose, at least. Like we can have a metaphysical debate about is there really meaning in the world? Well, you can't feel it anyway, so...
Say here exactly. Is this his revolutionary cure for autism? Autistic people are more likely to suffer with mental health difficulties. So yeah, things like sleep probably are very important to us. I know that it can be really detrimental to me if I don't get enough sleep, and I seem to need more sleep than some people around me for sure. But if I slept and woke up feeling sprightly, I'd still be autistic. I might be a happier autistic person, but I would still be autistic. And that's the thing. Autism isn't an illness, and it doesn't have a cure. In 1993, Jim Sinclair published an article which said the following: autism is not an appendage. Autism isn't something a person has or a shell that a person...
Who said that?
Autism 1993, Jim Sinclair isn't an illness, and it doesn't have a cure. In 1993, Jim Sinclair published an article which said the following: autism is not an appendage. Autism isn't something a person has or a shell that a person is trapped inside. There is no normal child hidden behind the autism. Autism is a way of being. It is pervasive.
And you can do things before a person is born.
It colours every experience, every sensation, perception, thought, emotion, and encounter, every aspect of existence. It is not possible to separate the autism from the person. And if it were possible, the person you'd have left would not be the same person you started with.
And this is an interesting flourish, because I'm not the same person I was yesterday. Right? So, and you too. There are probably things you can't change about yourself, and thinking that you could or should is probably only going to hurt you. Right? So, but I don't get those vibes from Palmer.
Family connection.
No alcohol.
No alcohol, no marijuana, no CBD. Try to avoid pills for everything that ails you.
Avoid pills for everything sounds like dangerous advice, particularly from a psychiatrist.
To try to avoid pills. That doesn't mean you shouldn't take them. And that's something you want to talk with your doctor about and so on. But, sometimes that's hard. Sometimes doctors just don't have the paradigm to understand the root causes of certain problems. And so, well, you may get quick or not so quick fixes that are ultimately temporary anyway. But, again, talk with your doctor about it. Listen around. Maybe you'll find there's MDs who are also functional medicine people. So I would also consult those people.
If your child's sleeping, please try methods other than pills, including melatonin and over-the-counter pills. Don't just whip out a pill.
Melatonin is a hormone that our bodies naturally produce when it gets dark, when it's time to go to sleep. Autistic children...
There's been some rather interesting stuff coming out of the scientific community in the past 10, 20 years on melatonin.
Sometimes prescribed it because autistic people can struggle with going to sleep. It's currently nearly 2 a.m. Where's my melatonin?
Every cell produces melatonin when you get infrared light or near infrared light onto it, right? Like in the mitochondria. And it's important it's a strong antioxidant. It's important for immunity. Right, so anyway.
Yeah, you'd have to see a GP, at least in this country, you'd have to see a GP to be prescribed it. And I doubt any GP is going to give it to you unless...
Or you could just go out in the sun, right? Or get a red lamp that's like pretty hot. You could melatonin that way, right? You don't need to get it prescribed, actually. You just get a red lamp.
They know that you've kind of tried a lot of other things first, like getting to bed at a set time every night. If you're going to say somebody should...
Or avoiding blue light in the evening, right? Like, yeah, lots of things you could do.
Completely.
And yeah, there should be a process for people to, go through their own lives, to live and learn, and maybe talk to somebody who has expertise, right? Like, that's a good thing. I'm a big fan.
Avoid something, people should completely avoid melatonin. You kind of have to explain why. You can't just say blanket, well, pills are bad because I said they're bad.
At least try some other
And again, there's totally different ways to get melatonin as well.
interventions, like let's get you off the screen 2 hours before bed. Let's develop a routine in our household that we're all going to wind down. We're all going to turn off the electronics.
Sleep hygiene, as they call it, is important. Having a routine, having time to relax before bed, not going on screens for maybe an hour before bedtime. None of these are things that I do. My sleep is not very hygienic. But yeah, none of those things are going to cure autism, if that's what we're trying to suggest here.
Maybe I'm going to read you a bedtime story, or we're going to play a game, or we're going to do something really boring that everybody's going to say, this is so boring, I'm getting sleepy. And I'm going to say, great. It's so boring that you're getting sleepy. That means you're going to go to sleep because it's bedtime.
You sleep that autism away. Good idea. I mean, as I say, it's great advice for maybe improving your mental health a little bit. Again, I worry that there's a little bit of implied blame here. Remember, the NHS says autism is not caused by bad parenting. It maybe suggests like, oh, you're not putting your child to bed properly. Your house is too chaotic. And that's why your child is autistic.
Chris, when people say to you, or when people say the quite common rebuttal that the reason we're seeing this rise in mental health disorders is just because there's more of a conversation about it. So more people are stepping forward. We now have a word for it. So there's just more labeling. And these mental health disorders, like the ones you've named, and even things...
All right, now I'm getting the sense she didn't actually pre-watch the video.
It's like ADHD and autism. It's just because there's more conversation going on. And these things aren't, in fact, increasing.
Hey, look, maybe we should be coming to Stephen Bartlett for autism advice after all. No, this is his podcast and he has chosen to platform this guy, so perhaps not.
That is a
Well, I'm choosing to platform this person.
common argument. I would argue that it's like just putting your head in the sand.
I thought he was going to seriously explain why he doesn't subscribe to this argument with some sort of...
Hundreds, if not thousands of hours of research. And so if you don't like it, you gotta put in the work. Or ask somebody who has. You gotta do that.
evidence, but no, just you have your head in the sand. Okay, then it's wrong.
That's a fair reply to the question in the context. However,
Because I think it's wrong.
The easiest place to get an accurate read on the true prevalence of mental illness.
and by the way, I'm not saying Palmer's right on this. I have reasons to believe that he's put in a lot of good work on the topic, and hey, I want to have a conversation. I want to see a conversation between people who have put in that kind of passion and work into this. All right, and so just for your understanding, I'm making this video. So you see, when somebody who's not equipped, not willing to stand on the same stage, is concern trolling. And again, she probably doesn't even understand. Which, I mean, fair enough, but just don't be that person, right? You do wanna give credit where credit is due, as they say, right? And if you don't feel like that's appropriate, because like people gotta run away when they say when somebody say, oh, this is the big thing, this is the big thing. You think, oh, you gotta run away. No, this is just you're like intuition hijacking your capacity to critically think. This is like you being lazy about critically thinking. And I mean, fair enough, that's a good self-defense mechanism. And I mean, I can't really blame her for being in a self-defensive mode here, because her whole thing seems to be broadening the societal acceptance of autistic people. And that's a good cause, by the way. Autistic people have all kinds of amazing things to offer to themselves and the world. But Palmer has a lot of amazing things to offer to the world and to the autists of the world, I'd like to believe. And so if that's wrong, I'd like to hear why. And this is not the kind of conversation this person is having.
Illness. And not just the recognition of it, but the true prevalence of it is to talk to school teachers who've been teaching for more than 30 years.
Another Huffington Post sign that your doctor is a quack. They rely on single-person testimonials, social media, or TV endorsements rather than peer-reviewed data.
If you ask them.
Okay, so peer-reviewed data is overstated, though. It's good to have, but it also doesn't make a third into less of a third, right? And there's plenty good data that you can only get through some open access, like pay-to-play peer-reviewed journal, and then people can be like, oh, but this is like, this is in some low-profile peer-reviewed journal, so it's like it's not worth it because of that. Like, dude.
Were you just not recognizing the children 30 years ago who were screaming?
As for anecdotal evidence, did he like talk about one autist where the diet helped them, or what is the argument? Go back.
Just, it's wrong because I think it's wrong.
The easiest place to get an accurate read on the true prevalence of mental illness, and not just the recognition of it, but
So
the
where do
true
we get an accurate read?
prevalence of it, is to talk to school teachers.
School teachers. I think we can skip forward again, but so she's completely mischaracterizing that.
Who've been,
Doctors peer-reviewed data.
if you ask them, were you just not recognizing the children 30 years ago who were screaming and tantruming in your classroom? Were you just not recognizing the children who were melting down when they got bad grades and injuring themselves in class? Were you just not recognizing the level of despair and anxiety that you see in children? Did you just have your head in the sand back then? And now, since everybody's talking about it, you see those behaviors, you see those symptoms. The school teachers and the guidance counselors will laugh at you and say, no, something has happened.
Again, with this language, which is designed to scare people. So something happened.
But is it? Maybe it's just not your style. I think he's appropriately generic here. If he said like, oh, this is clearly the rise of autism, that would be wrong, right? Something happened. Now it could be something else. Maybe it's not autism.
Recently, and before this thing happened, nobody used to misbehave. Is that what we're saying? This has very like kids these days sort of energy to it. This
I mean, if that's the experience he had when talking to teachers, high school teachers, so she's just completely dismissing the conversations he's been having, the research he's been doing, right? This is not very cool.
Nostalgia for when you were younger, and it was a better time, and nobody was autistic or an ADHD. I don't know about you, but
He said, as far as I could hear, there were just as many autistic kids back then, but it wasn't a problem. That's what I heard. This is a 1 or 2 hour video interview with the dude who did hundreds if not thousands of hours of researching this, and so he does a pretty darn good job condensing what his experience, what his research has shown here. I think it feels like she just doesn't want people to listen to experts. I feel like at least not in their function as experts, but in their function, maybe she wants people to listen to experts only in their function as authority figures. I don't know. But like, you got to listen to experts as people who explain their field of expertise. And then this is something you would get. Like, even if you ask an expert who's 100% opposed to what Talmud says, he would use this kind of language because he has a body of work to back him up. Maybe I'm wrong here, but do tell.
I have heard stories of what older people in my life got up to when they were younger. That shocked me. When people didn't have screens, they didn't have mobile phones, had to entertain themselves with all sorts of shenanigans, you know? People were not angels.
True.
And if people did used to be better behaved, well, physical punishment was only outlawed in the UK in 1987. Personally, I don't want to bring back the cane to spank all those autistic and ADHD people. No. The thing is, people who were neurodivergent in the past, they would have just had to continue on without accommodations, probably feeling stupid and picking up other labels.
Doesn't mean we shouldn't be accommodative for people with autism, but also something has happened potentially, right? I mean, going by the interviews he's had,
for themselves along the way, like lazy. My mom's only realized that she's probably dyslexic in adulthood. Her school experience wasn't particularly pleasant. She was made to feel dumb. She was
and yeah, there's some really smart people who have all kinds of learning problems who are actually incredibly smart, incredibly awesome at providing something to society. And yeah, it sucks. Like, our schooling system is really not suited for people like that.
put into the F class because her classes were categorized by grade. When I was growing up, I could never understand why she always called herself a stupid person, because she has such a good vocabulary, she has such great opinions about things, she's an incredibly talented
Why would you structure your classes like that? That's awful. Oh my lord.
artist. But school made her feel really small, and she's realized as she's got older, she just really struggles with reading. And hopefully today, that would have been picked up. And a lot of people who are being diagnosed now, who may have previously slipped through the cracks, might have a more internalized presentation of autism or ADHD. Not everybody who is autistic and ADHD is going to be like ripping up their school book, standing on the chair, stomping around. I'm not even sure how many people are doing those things. A child with ADHD might just daydream a lot and zone out and not finish their work on time. Neurodivergence doesn't mean
That could also be a sign of brain fog, though.
constant meltdowns, and meltdowns are a symptom of distress. And if you can help that person to not get into the place of being distressed, there's a high chance they're not going to have the meltdown. But if we're doing anecdotes, as Dr. Chris
And brain fog may be chronic inflammation to do with the brain, one way or another, which it's complicated. It's not this, it doesn't have to be necessarily in the brain, but I don't know. Anyway.
then my son's school class is wonderful. They're a lovely group of children, including all of the neurodivergent members of the class. Presenting neurodivergence in this way as if everybody's screaming and crying and banging on the windows is harmful. But regardless, why are we asking teachers about their 30-year-old, their stale experience?
I'm not sure why she brings up like, oh, autism means like these children are all like disruptive. Like that doesn't. You don't have to make that connection.
Surely as a psychiatrist he can see, you know, if this was a study and he was asking the participants to recall how things were 30 years ago versus now, would he not agree that that would be a crap piece of research? Recency bias as well.
And say, no. Something has happened. Something horrible has happened.
Really? Like 1 in 34 people are something horrible that has happened? Is Anthony Hopkins something horrible? Is Chloe Hayden something?
You should really not bring up any individual artists to like stand for the whole group, by the way. That's doing a disservice to the experience of any one artist, actually. Anyway.
Horrible is Jason Arde, who didn't speak.
And so there's, again, these two things. Conflating the horrible thing that may or may not have happened, and then there's more autism. These are not the same thing. And again, these are individual people, but like, you can't go from individual people to the experience of a random autistic person.
Until he was 11, who is the youngest black professor at Cambridge. Is he something horrible that's happened?
I wasn't ignoring mental health 30 years ago. I wasn't ignoring despair 30 years ago. I wasn't ignoring extreme anxiety and panic.
So as somebody who wasn't diagnosed until my mid-20s, I will agree that teachers didn't exactly ignore my needs. I would say some needs were accommodated. For example, I had a time where I just really could not cope with socializing at lunchtime, so I was allowed to go home for lunch. There were also some of my needs that just were not accommodated, and I was shouted at for example, being terrible at sports. I now have a dyspraxia diagnosis, but at the time, it was very much like I am misbehaving because I was so uncoordinated. It looked like I wasn't trying, and it was just, a behavioral problem. And then some things my mum was blamed for. For example, I had a few periods.
And by the way, it doesn't point to autism necessarily, just so we're clear on that. But so I would like to have an expert discussion here.
Periods of school avoidance throughout my school experience, and yeah, it was always her fault. She wasn't disciplining me enough. Probably some people even listening to that now will be like, well, why couldn't you just make her go to school? She has to. The issues were all still there, and some were dealt with better than others.
I wasn't ignoring tantrums in my classroom 30 years ago. They are skyrocketing.
It just paints this really bleak image, doesn't it? I just think if you're having that many autistic or whatever meltdowns in your class, you might want to have a look at that class environment maybe. If you
Palmer probably agrees.
enjoyed this video, you might enjoy this one about how some autistic people don't really get on with parents.
Alright, that was a pretty good video. I say that about every video where I feel like I could provide some insights and where the person in question was at least well intended. And I hope you learned something. At the very least, in terms of how to not react to stuff that you disagree with. Like, I would have loved to see her do a quick video research tour, like on YouTube, like who disagree with Palmer, and then sum up the kinds of disagreements. That would have been nice, or anything like that. There's so much stuff you can do when somebody puts out a book and does the touring on lots of podcasts. There's so many things you can do. People are entitled to have their books be seriously scrutinized when they present themselves as experts, and maybe rightfully so. At least that's what I'd like to believe. Because the alternative is this, right? And that can't be it, right? So with that, you just undermine the confidence in all kinds of establishments, and that's not a good thing. We are a society, and we need our civil society institutions. And we need to have reasons to trust them, and to also trust them actually. Right, so anyway, did enjoy the vid, do leave him a like. I will link it below in the description. Do leave a like, rate, comment, share over here as well. Share the video, etc., etc. Wish you the best. I hope you have a good one. Stay safe out there.